Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're glad you're with us. You may notice on Fridays, typically wearing my high school football attire. That is not for today. No high school game for me tonight. We'll get back to state playoffs tomorrow. Instead, getting ready to travel over to the Magnolia State of Mississippi for DawgNation coverage of Georgia versus Ole Miss in Oxford tomorrow. And because I'm about to hit the road, I also have shorts on today. Shocking breach of protocol. We typically try to dress at least semi-professionally, but today we are wearing shorts ahead of the road trip for tomorrow. Now, we've got a really good show for you here today. Final thoughts on some of the big games around the SEC here this weekend. Also, maybe some evidence as to why this Georgia game against Ole Miss tomorrow is even bigger than you perhaps realize from the Ole Miss side of things. We'll give you some information on that. And I thought something really cool happened on our show this week that you perhaps missed. We got a really interesting behind-the-scenes look at one of the most viral moments in Kirby Smart's entire history as the Georgia coach. In fact, it's one of the most viral moments in recent college history. And we got some new details on exactly what that moment was all about. And I'm going to explain to you why that's relevant for Saturday's game against Ole Miss. Jeff Sentell stops by. He's recently chatted with CJ Wiley. We'll do the latest recruiting news here too. So jam-packed, fully loaded, ready to close out a week, and happy to have you with us as we do. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We are briefly going to give you a blast from the past as a way of explaining what the stakes, I believe, are for tomorrow's game for Georgia against Ole Miss. And all of this kind of cool happened this week here on DawgNation Daily. It's the sort of moment that I don't think you should miss. And I love it when we get new details from, a guy that was in the room about something related to Georgia football. That's when we have guys like Jake Fromm and John Stinchcomb and Terrence Edwards and Davin Bellamy on the show, because they were not just witnesses to Georgia's football history, the way that many of us were, but they were participants in that history. And there is just a different level of knowledge you have about this when you're the one in the room, man in the arena, so to speak, as the Theodore Roosevelt quote makes famous. When you're kind of in that space and watching it play out, you just have a different perspective on all of that. And so one of the biggest, most kind of like viral moments from the early days of Kirby Smart's career as Georgia coach, I believe is relevant this week because of something that happened on DawgNation Daily. So let me remind you of this. Do y'all remember, and we've had a few of these happen over the years, 3 or 4 at least, these clips from like the fiery Kirby Smart speeches that end up going viral. And, my sort of like small scale conspiracy theory is that somebody from an official capacity at Georgia has greenlit the release of these videos, because when George Pickens making a wild catch during a scrimmage or Kirby Smart halftime at Florida, if something like that escaped without the thumbs up from obviously higher ups, well, that person would be immediately fired, because there's no better, larger breach of protocol than that. So the fact that we don't typically hear about that kind of thing happening would lead you to believe that when some of this stuff sort of creeps out from Georgia, it was kind of given the thumbs up, the green light. This is okay to leak onto the internet somehow, some way. If they ever want to use DawgNation as a platform to do that, we're, of course, open for business on any of that. But the point is, one of these moments was a speech. And it's funny, I don't think this came out until like a year later probably, but eventually it did. The very famous "I want you to eat" speech from Kirby Smart. This was early in his coaching career. We can't play you the entire thing because, frankly, it's pretty profane. But we can play you a brief clip of this just as a way of reminding you of, oh, yeah, I remember when that happened. Kirby Smart, from very early in his coaching days, laying it out on the line for his team prior to a big game.
I want you to eat. I want you to eat. Do you want it? Do you want it? Show me.
So that's just kind of a brief. There was a lot longer there, and it was a lot even more colorful than that. But it's that sort of classic thing. And I've said this before. It's kind of amazing how good of an extemporaneous speaker Kirby Smart is. Like, he really is pretty good at just sort of riffing off the cuff, not rehearsed, not scripted, certainly not reading off a teleprompter or anything like that. But when you see a lot of these things, we'll play this stuff, whether it's going on a rant to a post-game interviewer or the locker room speech that comes out. Smart rarely ever stumbles over a word. He almost always seems to have the right cadence to the speech. He's actually, it's amazing for someone who's not, like a professional communicator by trade necessarily. It's really pretty amazing how good Smart is at speeches like that. But the reason why I play that for you is because this week here on DawgNation Daily, we got a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at why that speech was such an interesting thing for UGA when it happened and why it mattered. And a lot of this came from Davin Bellamy. Of course, you know him, the great former Georgia linebacker, and really a big addition to DawgNation over the course of this football season. He's brought so much to our shows, whether it's with me each week here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, or Kaylee with the pregame show, or obviously our DawgNation postgame show, where he really gets into what's happening there. I just think that Davin's analysis has been extraordinary. And there was a moment this week with Davin on social media. I'm not going to kind of go back through all of this, but some of you are aware of this, where Davin had expressed a little bit from kind of an old school, hard-nosed football perspective about the fact that, Carson Beck had sort of shown up in some viral videos involving the very famous, I guess you almost call it sort of Instagram type star, TikTok type star that he dates, one of the Cavender twins, they also play college basketball for Miami. And Davin sort of expressed some frustration about that. And so on the show this week, we gave him a chance to sort of explain himself a little bit more. And of course, Davin made it very clear. Listen, I love Carson Beck. I think that Carson Beck's outstanding. I just want everybody, Davin would say, to realize the very short window of opportunity that you have to make the most of your college career. And Davin, who's got a couple of years on him now from when he was in college, he obviously speaks about this from the perspective of that experience of, man, I look back on that and you realize, man, when you got a chance to have a big game or a chance to have a big season or a chance to leave a distinguished legacy, taking full advantage of that, of course, is just about the most important thing you could do. And as Davin told us down the show this week, he actually referenced the speech, if you want to call it that. We just heard a brief clip of from Kirby Smart there, the very famous "I want you to eat" speech. Well, here's a behind-the-scenes look from Davin Bellamy about what the actual origin of that was. This is fascinating from our show this week. Davin Bellamy here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
One thing Coach Smart always told us our senior year, because we had never been there before, that class. Yeah. And the famous speech that, he said, "I want you to eat, I want you to eat, I want you to eat." Well, that's when we got off the plane from the Rose Bowl and we were dead tired from the jet lag, and we still had a full padded practice, and he restarted practice because the energy wasn't there. And he told us, you have this team now, and the younger guys, you guys may never play here again in the national championship and be in the playoffs. They did, but when you have a team like Georgia has this year, that small window of opportunity to go on a championship run is very small, and you may never go again. And you got to take advantage of that. And you put all your energy into that.
I mean, don't you love that? I mean, Davin telling the story so well of, well, here's exactly when that speech took place. Because people always kind of have their suspicions about some of this kind of stuff. And a lot of times this never gets confirmed. But Davin says, hey, that was right after we got back from Pasadena. We were having a full padded practice, and our guys just were not into it. And if you'll remember, that Rose Bowl that year in the national championship, it was the shortest span of time you can have between those two games, just 7 days. And not getting that energy, Georgia had already accomplished more than anyone ever thought they could have in that 2017 season by winning the SEC, by getting the playoff, and by winning what I think is still now, even to this day, considered the best national semifinal game of all against Oklahoma. Perhaps the Georgia-Ohio State game would be that in some people's mind. But the Rose Bowl, Georgia-Oklahoma, is still kind of viewed as arguably the top college football playoff game of all time. So Georgia, had its opportunity to hang a mission accomplished banner and say, hey, we've done enough. We don't quite have the energy for this. And, of course, they did not go on to win the national championship, of course. But you hear Davin relaying what Kirby's saying there of, man, you've got this team right now. You've got this opportunity right now. And without being too much of a blowhard here for a moment, like the one thing that I've learned, because I'm obviously a good bit older than Davin is, like the one thing that I've learned is like the secret to success in life, to the extent that any of us have, actual true success, is being wise enough to recognize what can only be done right now. It's like you can spend your whole life working, but you can only be a father to your children when they're young, while they're young. At a certain point in time, they've just grown up, and you can't go back and get that experience back, or, with your wife at any point in time. I mean, or when you're in school, the chance to sort of build the sort of foundation for the future you want. There are certain things you can only do in that moment. And yeah, there'll be more chances for more success later on, but recognizing the moment that you're in and the things that you can only do while you're in that moment, I mean, to me, that really is like the hallmark of true wisdom, without being, too blowhardy about any of this kind of stuff. And so when Davin says that Kirby relays to them, you've got this team right now, and you've got this moment right now to take full advantage of that. Don't let it slip by. Don't miss out on the fact that one of these days you may realize, man, that was a fleeting opportunity I had to make the most of a situation, and did I do everything I could to do it? And Davin was saying all of that. If you heard Wednesday's show, you know this, in relationship to whether it be, Carson Beck playing his best moving forward, or as Kirby Smart, and a video clip that some of y'all saw from the SEC Network this week, challenging the Georgia players to do their best to sort of help Carson be the best that he can be. But whether it's Carson or the guys around Carson or the other side of the ball or whatever else, it's that opportunity right now to take full advantage of this chance to be what still can be for Georgia a historic team. And pausing and reflecting on that, as Davin did here this week, I think it really matters because of the stretch we're about to see Georgia go through. Saturday, and we're going to do more on this in a moment, especially from the Ole Miss side, is a huge game. I think the stakes of this game, because we're now in the month of November, are more easily recognizable than they were in October when Georgia played Texas, or in September when Georgia played Alabama. And so because of that, you can make a case, even though the Ole Miss reputation is probably not what the other schools are, this is the biggest game that Georgia has played yet this season, because of when Georgia's playing it. And then the one next week back here at home, night game for Tennessee, how much fun is that going to be? That's perhaps even bigger. So recognizing, as Kirby Smart challenged Georgia back in 2017, as Davin challenged this Georgia team here this year, recognize the moment that you're in, and recognizing that your chance to do this with these brothers, with this uniform, to be a part of the great legacy of Georgia football. This is your chance right now. Take full advantage of it. Do you want to, as Kirby Smart once said, do you want to eat? Do you want to take full advantage of this moment? And, of course, this week, Kirby Smart, in a very different manner, also talked a little bit about that too, which is that when you look at what Georgia is about to face, and, yeah, they have not been perfect up to this point. We can cite this, we can cite that, we can cite whatever. They have not been perfect. But the opportunity to be national champions remains just as alive for UGA as any other team in the country. So you can sort of cite Georgia's blemishes and you can talk about their faults, but the truth is there isn't a team right now obviously better than Georgia, and there won't be a team better than Georgia at the end of the season as long as Georgia keeps finding a way to get better in the games and the moments that matter the most. And Kirby Smart talked about that this week, his desire to continue to see improvement from UGA, perhaps living out that passion that Davin Bellamy described a couple of moments ago. This is what Kirby Smart said about that this week.
I mean, it's not always just about Ole Miss. It's about, we've got a tough schedule remaining, and Ole Miss is who we're focused on this week. And it's about us looking kind of inside and saying, what can we improve on and get better at that's going to help us in this game? It's going to be a very passionate, competitive, high-stakes game on the road in the SEC, in which, I've been to Ole Miss a lot of years, and it's a really tough place to play, and they'll have a great environment. So we're focused on us and getting better.
I'm looking down at my DawgNation.com comment section. One of our good commenters, his name is Yard Dog. He says that group of players that came back, he means in 2017, represents Georgia's golden generation, and I do kind of agree with that. I mean, obviously, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Davin Bellamy, Lorenzo Carter, they were special guys. The freshmen that year, Andrew Thomas and Jake Fromm, they were special. DeAndre Swift, they were special guys, too. That was a special team. They came up just a little bit short of winning a national championship, but they laid the foundation for the kind of program that could eventually win multiple national championships. And I do believe that was a special, as you say, generation of Georgia football, and it deserves to be remembered that way. But I think the point that we're getting to here is that the prestige and the privilege of being remembered as a special team having played in a special era for Georgia football. That's not just reserved for the guys who kind of paved the way in 2017 or the all-time great 2021 team or the back-to-back 2022 team. That's an opportunity that's available to this Georgia team right now. They can also etch their names in history, and they can be remembered as fondly as anybody from 2017 is. And one day, 5-6 years from now, we'll have those guys as regular guests on our show. Looking back, well, back in my day, we were doing this and we were doing that. Like, those are the moments that can happen for this group here right now. So whatever, for the rest of this month, the next 3 months, whatever you can do to block out distractions, whatever you can do to keep your eyes on the mission, whatever you can do to band together, support each other, block out, even loudmouth like me, block me out. Don't pay attention to me either. Focus in on this opportunity, because to go to Ole Miss and win on Saturday would be a phenomenal accomplishment. To come back home and get ready for Tennessee the following week, significant challenge there too. But the kind of team that Georgia has right now could potentially be remembered just as special as any of these other teams in Georgia history. They got their chance to eat on Saturday against Ole Miss. They got their chance to show just how much they're coming together. Frankly, I can't wait to see what it all looks like. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy that you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, all platforms, radio, podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just so happy that you're a part of our program today, and so thankful that our friends at Kroger make all of this possible for you, too. You know, we've been rolling through football season, and now we're kind of in that month of November where we also got to do double duty here right now. You're getting ready for game day on Saturday, but no doubt you're also thinking about coming up in just a few weeks. It's going to be Thanksgiving, right? And that means the turkey on the table. That means all the stuff to go with it. You want a great Thanksgiving? Well, our friends at Kroger got you covered on that. You want a great watch party this week for Georgia and Ole Miss? Got you covered on that, too. You're invading the Grove. Many folks perhaps doing that. Well, listen, they're enjoying all of that as well. You're stocked up with our friends at Kroger to make the most of game day, to make the most of your holidays, to make the most of it all. Kroger's got you covered for sure. So stop in store and shop today online at Kroger.com. Become a Kroger Boost member. Take full advantage of everything else they've got going on, too. We love our friends at Kroger. We're proud of how long Kroger has been such a big part of everything we've done here on DawgNation, and in particular DawgNation Daily. So make sure you check out Kroger for all your game day needs, your holiday needs, and everything else. And, of course, looking forward to a fun Thanksgiving, Christmas after that, and what we hope is a long run through the college football playoff after that for these Georgia Bulldogs. Okay, we got Jeff Sentell here coming up. A lot of UGA recruiting talk with him. Georgia's actually added 3 commits in the last week. Really only one of those we've really talked about. We did, obviously, a lot on CJ Wiley yesterday, but we've just been so busy aftermath of Florida, look ahead to Ole Miss. We really haven't done a ton of like Rashawn Dinkins flipping from Georgia Tech, Spafford, the receiver out in California, the 2026. So we're going to do some of that with Jeff today, and also kind of talk about what's next for UGA recruiting here too. So that's going to be fun with Jeff Sentell here coming up in just a couple minutes' time. Prior to that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse, which today is presented by Zagoria Law. And so I mentioned this a moment ago, that there is a chance that this Georgia game on Saturday is maybe the biggest that Georgia's played all year long. And we can sort of say that from the Georgia perspective because of the recognizable stakes, the college football playoff and all of that. But there is another perspective on this from the Ole Miss side, who's, you know, kind of playing for its playoff lives on Saturday, where that's even more true, how high the stakes are, how important this game is. I thought, is it Nakos or Nakos, Pete Nakos from On3. I see his name. Obviously, he's a pretty prolific writer, but I don't hear it spoken very much. I don't want to mispronounce his name. We'll call him Pete Nakos here, or Nakos, maybe Nakos sounds better. Pete Nakos here from On3. He did a very interesting story this week, looking at how last year's loss for Ole Miss to Georgia, blowout fashion, like 50-something-17, whatever it was, became kind of a turning point, at least the folks at Ole Miss are saying, for the Ole Miss program. And that blowout loss actually became a lot of fuel for what has been a very successful NIL initiative, raising a lot of money there at Ole Miss. And let me be clear here just for a moment. I've said this before, and I don't apologize for this. There's a lot about Lane Kiffin I'm not quite so sure I like as a coach. I'm just not really quite so sure how serious he is. I don't know that Kiffin is the kind of coach that can ever be mentioned in the same breath, for instance, as a Kirby Smart or, as a Dan Lanning, even a Steve Sarkisian. They once sort of started their coaching career kind of together. I don't know that Kiffin's that level of coach. I don't apologize for feeling that way. But the one thing that Kiffin undoubtedly has been very good at, and if Kiffin ever gets the really big job that he wants, such as a Florida or something like that you would presume that he wants, one of the reasons why he would is because Kiffin has proven to be very ambitious and very successful at convincing his donors to pony up big dollars to support the Ole Miss NIL efforts. They have been very good and very creative with how they've raised money there, so much so that Ole Miss, which we would think of as sort of not one of the larger scale SEC programs overall. This is not, typically it's not as big of a stadium. It's not as big of a fan base. The state of Mississippi is not very populous. It's split between two different SEC schools. So there's a lot about Ole Miss that's just smaller than the other teams in the SEC. They can have good teams, but as a program, it's always just going to be a little bit smaller. That's just, sort of the way that goes. And yet they have been punching far above their weight class when it comes to what they've been able to do from an NIL standpoint. That's what Pete Nakos sort of wrote about at On3 this week. I want to give you a couple of sentences here. You should go to On3 and read the full story. I think it's really good. So what Nakos writes is that Walker Jones is the executive director of the Grove Collective. This is the NIL arm for Ole Miss. And he's saying, last year Georgia beaten Ole Miss 52-17. And that kind of becomes the moment of, man, if we really want to have better talent, we got to raise our NIL dollars. And if we don't get better talent, we're never going to beat a team like Georgia or a team like Alabama that they played up until this year every single year. And so the quote from Jones is this: you got to have proof of concept. You've got to have moments in time to kind of tell if you're on the right path. He means with his fundraising initiatives. He goes on to say, I would point to the Georgia loss last year that showed us where we were still deficient and still had work to do. And then the Penn State win in the Peach Bowl showed us that we had really a good nucleus of players that we needed to retain and build around. So I think those two moments in time, one of them was a negative with a loss, but it actually taught us a lot about a roster, meaning that we got to be a lot better. We got to spend a lot more. Therefore, you got to raise more so you can spend more so you can compete alongside a school like Georgia that blew us out last year. And so that's what this offseason was. And a lot of you remember that. We can bring that down now. A lot of you remember that a lot of the offseason was talking about, boy, who Ole Miss is spending big to bring in and, the way in which they're transforming their roster. And I would say the one spot, especially with a guy like Walter Nolan, but the one spot that Ole Miss clearly looks like the very best of the SEC is a defensive line. And in a pre-NIL era, other than like the one sort of one-off year in which Hugh Freeze was pretending that rules didn't exist, and sort of the other than like the sort of like one-off, was it class of 2014 or 2013 maybe it was, that Ole Miss just went, hog wild. Other than that, Ole Miss has never really had a defensive line that looked like Alabama's or looked like LSU's or looked like, what Georgia's has in recent years. That's just not the level of program that Ole Miss was. But they have leveraged their ability to bring in NIL dollars, donors really committed to the program, marshal those funds towards, guys like Walter Nolan out of the transfer portal. And all of a sudden, it's really this Ole Miss defense. I would say even more so than the offense. The offense, a lot of guys who've sort of been there, and I think it's fine. It certainly was very explosive against Arkansas last Saturday. But the real challenge for Georgia is how you deal with an Ole Miss defensive line on Saturday that looks an awful lot like the kind of defensive lines that Georgia had when it was winning national championships. That's where the real transformation that Walker Jones tells On3 about. They put all of that money into bringing in 26 new players, whatever, but so many of those guys right there on the defensive line to the point where running the football, something that hasn't been very easy for Georgia at all this year, even tougher against what I would say is probably, without a doubt, the best defensive line that Georgia's faced to this point in the season. In fact, go back to Monday here for a moment. Kirby Smart talked about that, about why Ole Miss presents such a big challenge with its defensive front. This is what Kirby Smart said.
They're big. I mean, they're physical. The only remedy for stopping the run is have big people that are hard to move. I mean, in our history here at Georgia, we've traditionally been pretty good at stopping the run. You go back to the Jordan Davis days, which were probably the best we had. It's a strong physical defensive line, and they have it now. They're physical at the point of attack, and they're good at attacking and stopping the run.
So when you face Ole Miss tomorrow, this isn't the same thing as facing Ole Miss, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, something like that. This is a team that has really spent big to create the kind of defense that really gives you some pause. And for a Georgia team that's, as we talked about to begin the show, that's still trying to figure some things out offensively, this is a tough defense to do that against, but that is certainly the task that awaits these Bulldogs. Ole Miss says last year that loss to UGA became a motivational force to raise as much money as we can, spend as much we possible to bring in a whole bunch of transfers, make the college football playoff in what we knew was going to be an expanded 12-team era. And tomorrow that mission gets put to the test. That's what it's all about for Ole Miss. And that is why, for Georgia, this stands as such a big game. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, listen, I love what Zagoria Law does for folks in our audience here, because anytime you specialize in kind of a narrow focus, you narrow your focus to broaden your reach. And when you put a lot of expertise into, especially when it comes to law, something that can be obviously a very complicated thing, and there's so many different facets to the law, the more that you're able to kind of specialize in on one area, the more success you have a chance to have. And that's clearly what Zagoria Law has done. They're the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. That means they literally wrote the book on how to win these types of cases. I mean, they literally wrote a book about this. They're the only ones in Georgia that sort of specialize in folks who've been injured by a dog bite from, a dog from an owner that maybe wasn't taking proper care of that dog, or sometimes it's like getting knocked over if you're in a park and some giant dog. Some of these dogs are so big. Come over, you knock you down, you break your arm. Obviously that's your own type of deal, there too, where you kind of need something to, probably have, get the compensation that you deserve. That is what our friends at Zagoria Law specialize in. They want to be there and meet the needs of those who've been injured by a dog that wasn't yours, or someone you love has been injured by a dog where you think the owner of that dog was negligent, not taking proper care, not doing the right thing. That is what Zagoria Law specializes in. So I want you to give them a call. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. This is dog spelled the conventional way, D-O-G. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That website is ZagoriaLaw.com, the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. Make sure you check out Zagoria Law today. Glad to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse here, too. All right, before we're done, we're going to have some fun getting you hyped up for Georgia and Ole Miss. We'll do that with our buddy Cody Chaffins. That's always really good. Also, big reaction to some news yesterday coming from the lousy, stinking Gators. We'll give you that. Wild scene in Baton Rouge on Saturday night. Gets even wilder. We'll tell you more about that coming up here in a moment, too. But for now, on everything happening with UGA recruiting, including the continued aftermath of a major win for Georgia with the 4-star wide receiver CJ Wiley earlier this week. Let's talk about that all with Jeff Sentell here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always great to have Jeff Sentell on the show. And full disclosure, Jeff and I, along with our own Cody Chaffins, we're getting ready to head over to Mississippi a little bit later on this afternoon. Looking forward to traveling with those gentlemen and looking forward to being a part of a big day of coverage for DawgNation tomorrow. Always a lot of fun. But, Jeff, before that, we've got news to address here and business to take care of from earlier this week. The 4-star wide receiver CJ Wiley, surprisingly, at least in given the time of it all, just right there on the dime, switches gear, flips away from Florida State, commits to Georgia. And you had a chance to speak with Wiley earlier this week. So tell me how you found him, and tell me and all of us what the aftermath is there around the Milton program for C.J. Wiley making some news this week that every Georgia fan was certainly very excited about.
Brendan, I guess I've probably interviewed since last season, even last season, I probably interviewed C.J. Wiley maybe 8, 10, 12 times, especially considering 7-on-7 season and spring practice. And Brandon, I'm going to tell you, he was remarkably chill, happy. You could tell, if you didn't know that he dropped the bombshell about committing to Georgia, really out of the blue, CJ just does things his own way. But if you didn't know that big news event happened on Wednesday night, you'd kind of be like, what's different? You know, like, did he get some great news? Did he win the lottery? Did he get a cool new Georgia quarter zip like the one Brandon Adams is rocking right now and looking stunning and sophisticated? He just seemed at peace, Brandon. That's the way I can say it with CJ. Like, we put a video clip of an interview that will go up on Before the Hedges soon that we spoke to him afterward. And it's a pretty fitting image right there, Brandon, because you have CJ Wiley in the forefront, and in the background, there's Justice Terry. Those are the two really closing salvo booms for Georgia's 2025 recruiting class, hopefully for the Dogs. But, man, CJ was he just kind of thought it over. And it was really funny, Brandon, some like insidery stuff there on this decision. He told me and Coach Reeves at Milton High School, great coach in the state of Georgia and even nationally, he told me that the decommitment was planned prior to the Texas A&M visit. Like, they were like, it was during the week, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to decommit from Florida State on Sunday. It just happened that the timing meshed up there with right off his Texas A&M visit. So that was kind of a false read for a lot of the national recruiting media and a lot of the recruiting media in general that thought, okay, he goes to A&M, he decommits, and likely the Aggies are doing what the Aggies have done, especially in the state of Georgia with 2026 recruits. But it was not really correlated. It did come down to Georgia, Texas A&M with a little bit of LSU in there. But ultimately, CJ just decided Georgia was where he wanted to be. He wants to develop. He wants to play in big games. He wants to play for national championships. And obviously, there was a lot of uncertainty at Florida State, considering the way their season has gone this year.
So you kind of touched on the visit to Texas A&M. I guess I'm curious, like, how much of a factor was Texas A&M in this? I mean, we obviously saw them win the other day with the 2026 wide receiver, Aaron Gregory from Douglas County. So, you know, recruiting wide receivers in Georgia is something A&M was already doing. The visit certainly got a lot of attention. And, you know, obviously he was, kind of talking a lot about, that and the aftermath of that. Like, how much, how big of a factor was A&M in this recruitment?
Pretty big. I think they were second place in the end, Brandon. And it's really, Texas A&M, they're doing it a different way with Elko now, like how they, in 2022, and James Coley was even on that recruiting class. They really money whipped everybody to the recruiting national pillar, some of the highest ever recruiting class numbers ever with 5 stars, top 100 guys. But they're kind of back at it again. You mentioned Aaron Gregory at Douglas County. There's not only him, there's his teammate Jordan Carter, there's Xavier Tiller at Langston Hughes. Texas A&M has quietly already secured 2026 commitments from 3 of the top 15 players in the state of Georgia for 2026. So I think Elko's message is resonating as well as the structure, solid consistency, but they're winning, Brandon. Everybody wanted to be around that winning culture. And for that visit specifically, let me give you a little more inside baseball stuff. He was going to Georgia heading into that visit, and really he just wanted to be sure and make sure Texas A&M didn't have more juice for him than Georgia. And that was really kind of a make sure, cross all the I's, and make sure that it ended up being, Brandon, a disqualifying visit in the event that it determined that, yeah, he liked it a lot better, what he saw at Georgia, what he felt at Georgia compared to A&M. And the other big thing is everybody, the visits are still very crucial in this NIL era and collective era, even with revenue sharing coming down the pipe, because he said he went to Georgia for the Auburn game right after taking the SAT. And he just kind of looked around and he says, yeah, I can play here. This is the atmosphere. This is the environment. The coaches welcomed him. The coaches were very consistent, saying, hey, man, we're going to be there until the end. Sort of that same persistence with Kirby Smart and the staff that won over KJ Bolden. That's also what won over CJ Wiley. And in the end, CJ just felt really comfortable. And he had conversations with the players on that visit. Like, he needed that inside information of his own. Talking to the players, feeling welcomed by the players. Of course, his boy, Ethan Barbour. It's another story in of itself, Brandon. Not only so many subplots here. Wiley's sister is an outstanding freshman volleyball player at Georgia Tech, but Ethan Barbour, the supremely talented ASS kicker at Milton is what they like to call him. He's there, and those two guys were going to wind up playing together 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, and then at least their first 3 years of college in Athens. So that's a pretty special subplot as well.
So there's a couple of recruiting stories that we really haven't hit on this week. We've just been so busy with other things. Let me start with Vance Spafford here. Speaking of receivers, that also commits to Georgia in the class of 2026. Total confession, Georgians of my age, we don't always have the world's greatest relationship with the first name Vance because a lot of us were kids when Coy and Vance replaced Bo and Luke on the Dukes of Hazzard, and that was very controversial if you are of a certain age here. So I'm going to give a clean slate here to Vance Spafford as a very different kind of Vance than the sort of, dime store version of Bo and Luke from back when I was a kid. But honestly, you see the highlights here and you look what Spafford's doing out there. This is a, pretty exciting and pretty dynamic playmaker. And I think there's a lot to like about his addition to Georgia for the class of 2026.
Yeah, Brandon, I'll keep with your Georgians of a certain age vernacular. Didn't know you pulled that one out we were able to pull that one out on the show today. But this Vance is faster than the General Lee, maybe even running on some of Uncle Jesse's special moonshine.
I like it.
He's 4.35 laser. Like we had this discussion on Hedges where there's a lot of folks that sit there and they go, hey, man, it's 2026. Wake me up, hit the snooze button on this kid in November of his junior year, and let's see what happens. This guy's different. Number one, he wants to get out of California. He's done the West Coast for the first 17 years of his life. He always wanted to go to the SEC. It was going to be Georgia or Ole Miss, very likely. He took his first visit to Georgia, Brandon. He was very candid. He told me, he's like, man, this is a great visit. If this thing goes well, Georgia's going to be the leader by a lot. That's what happened. Georgia was the leader by a lot. And all of a sudden, Brandon, we got these top 75 overall wide receivers just falling into the laps left and right. And I think that has a lot to do with James Coley. But that picture right there, frame of reference in the green jersey, the Future 50, that is where the 50 best skill players go down to IMG Academy for a combine and for a 7-on-7 competition. And there was the fastest man competition, and Vance Spafford won that with a 4.35 laser 40. Brandon, there are only 2 players on the Georgia roster right now that I would say would be clearly faster than this high school junior right now. That would be Arian Smith, and that would be Dwight Peanut Phillips, the second now. That's how fast he is. Not only is he fast, there's a 5-star Alabama cornerback commitment on his high school team that cannot guard him. Nobody can guard him. He has 36 touchdown catches over his current season and his last season. Brandon, you throw in Talon Taylor, you throw in Tyler J. Williams, you throw in Landon Roldan, you throw in, and make sure I get them all, Thomas Blackshear. All of a sudden, the Georgia wide receiver position, again, it looks about as good as we've seen it since 2019, 2020, when Georgia stacked Pickens, Blaylock, Burton, Rosemy Jack Saint, and all those guys into the mix. Also, Jeremy Burton.
Another story we haven't talked about probably as much as we should. Georgia, this one had been kind of in the works for a while. It's just sort of a matter of when it was going to happen. Well, now it has. Rashawn Deakins, outstanding safety from Warner Robins. Georgia's obviously already got a commitment with Isaiah Gibson out of the Warner Robins program. That's an edge rushing defensive end type. Deakins, obviously really good safety. Was going to go to Georgia Tech. Now he's not. This is Georgia stepping in here and winning with a guy like Deakins, who I know is having an outstanding season. Jeff, give us a little bit more of the kind of, I guess, particulars here on Georgia flipping Deakins away from Tech.
Yeah, so this has kind of been in the works, like you said. Georgia basically, especially when Rashad Johnson had flipped to Texas A&M, Brandon, another foil. Good morning, Peaches. Yesterday was her birthday, and she's a little ornery this week. She thinks that the world owes her everything. So, like Brandon, with him, it was always on the way, especially when that flip happened to A&M. But I want to tell you, this guy right here, remember the name, Rashawn Deakins. He is going to be a fan favorite. He's going to be a guy that you're going to want to buy the jersey for. You're going to want to remember the name, especially, Brandon. Let's look at the roster. We always try to look at the roster. Malachi Starks, Dan Jackson won't be in the program next year. The Georgia's safety position right now, Deakins is the only safety committed in the class. I think he has a chance to play very early because he is an all-around special player. I mean, Brandon, these highlights you're seeing of him right here are just absolutely sick. He does it basically. The first 4 plays of his tape are as good as you would ever want to see for a high school safety. He is a coach on the field. His defensive coordinator lets him call plays from the back end, lets him apply coverage, lets him apply pressure. He gets about either a touchdown per game on offense, whether it's kick return, special teams, or catching a pass, or running the ball in as a Wildcat quarterback. It can be argued, and I know a lot of good folks down at Warner Robins that have seen it with their own eyes over the past 3 or 4 years, that it's very hard to figure out who is the more dynamic all-around football player right now. In the comparison there, see him catching that ball right there. In the comparison there between Isaiah Gibson, great 5-star edge rusher, going to cause a lot of havoc, or you've got Rayshawn Dinkins. Man, that play right there where he dropped, he makes a one-handed catch. Rayshawn Dinkins, Brandon, is the type of guy, he's been so good for so long. He had 8 interceptions as a sophomore, and now everybody on the schedule looks at him like the Bermuda Triangle. Don't go anywhere near that with the ball, young quarterback, or you're going to get fired. That's how special this guy is. Dinkins is going to make a ton of plays in Athens.
Another somewhat slow developing story that actually went against UGA was Shamari Earls flipping from Georgia to Michigan. This had been kind of rumored to be happening for a while, and eventually it just sort of did. In fact, I guess it dropped somewhat late Friday night. What happened there, Jeff? Why did Georgia lose out on what was, I think, for a lot of people, the sort of centerpiece cornerback of this class? What went down there?
Well, I think a couple of things happened, Brandon. I think some of it is Michigan's reputation. Obviously, they have the defending national champion. Obviously, the season's not going too strongly for them this year, but they can point to a guy like Will Johnson, who's going to be a first-round pick, probably a top 5 pick, their talented corner. There is more of an opening, I would say, there in Ann Arbor. Best believe this is happening, Brandon. Schools are looking at Georgia and saying, you see the number 1 cornerback in the country? He is not getting a lot of really good reps. He's not getting starting reps. He's not showing up a lot in games. He's not playing in every game for the Dogs. And if the number 1 corner in the country, the number 2 overall player in Ellis Robinson, is not getting on the field quickly in Athens, it's probably going to be the same thing for you. Meanwhile, our place is wide open for you to come and play. I think there's a lot of stuff that went into that. Michigan also kind of never gave up, Brandon. You know how we celebrate Kirby Smart and the CJ Wiley recruitment, the KJ Bolden recruitment a year ago, where he never really gave up. The Dogs never really gave up. They were in it until the final minute. I think that's what happened with Michigan there as well with Shamari Earls.
So to kind of wrap all this up, losing out on a guy like Earls, but winning with, 3 pretty impressive commits, 2 from 2025, 1 from 2026. What's next on the horizon here for Georgia? First of all, the actual early signing period itself is going to be here before you know it. This year has just flown by, so that's coming up soon. Sounds like Justice Terry is still waiting until December to make his choice. That's obviously a very big name in state. So what will be kind of the next dominoes to fall for Georgia recruiting?
Well, Brandon, I got to tell you, I'm glad you asked me that question because I'm going to take it in a place maybe you didn't think I was going to go. Of course, Justice Terry is going to announce on December the 6th. He told me he's going to wait as long as possible there. Chase Linton is going to announce on November the 20th. I think both of those recruitments, they feel the tint on them right now is still definitely very red and black. But there's going to be some shrinking that's happening right now, Brandon. There was the thought that the rosters would expand from 85 to 105 for scholarship players. That would reduce the walk-ons. I don't know if you saw it, but yesterday, Ross Dellinger, I believe, reported from the SEC office that the SEC will abide and organize their rosters. They've told the member schools that, no, we're going to hang with 85 next year. That's our number. We're going to see how things develop. And then you have another 20 roster spots for walk-ons. Very intriguing there because I think there's a lot of these names, Brandon, a lot of these names around the state of Georgia that wouldn't have gotten offers from Georgia in the past, but in that thinking, we're going to get 20 more scholarships, they get an offer. A lot of those guys, I won't name the names, but they've been committed to places like Cincinnati, Rutgers, places like that. I think Georgia's roster is going to shrink, and then the number of potentials shrinks as well. I mean, I think there's an offensive tackle they're looking at that's currently committed to Troy, that's in the JUCO ranks. He's going to visit Georgia for the Tennessee game. There's one name, Brandon, I want you to think about, maybe tuck this one away, and that's Tavion Wallace, the Arkansas commitment. I kind of tease this on Hedges, and Brandon, sometimes this stuff right now can get very wild. I think the CJ Wiley decision, I'm gonna label that one as one of the more surprising ones I've ever covered, just because of how quickly it turned and secretly it turned. But Tavion Wallace is the one that I think is really kind of got a Georgia flavor to it right now. I spoke to him last night. There will be a story on DawgNation.com today from Tavion Wallace that discusses, still feels that good juju, still feels like Athens is a second home, as well as Arkansas feels like home. There is a strong and vibrant connection there with Glenn Schumann. Tavion told me, I hear a lot of stuff about Georgia, how they have more linebackers in Glenn Schumann's room than Brandon has nice Georgia apparel that he wears on DawgNation Daily. But he also looks at Chris Cole and he says, man, look at Chris Cole. He's playing. If you're good enough, you're old enough, Georgia will play you. So that's an example there. And I got to make sure you know this. I think you know a lot of the players in the state, Brennan, but Tavion Wallace, his older brother, played at Kentucky. He's now starting in the NFL as a rookie for the Carolina Panthers. And this is another one of those linebackers who plays a lot of running back, but he hits that 21, 22 GPS number on the field with those catapult GPS measuring devices. And that just screams Georgia linebacker, especially when your older brother is in the NFL and you're wired for success like Tavion Wallace is. So that's one name that I want DawgNation to kind of have it on the back burner, maybe put it on the grill, let it slow roast a little bit or slow cook a little bit. That's another intriguing name, but I think the class and the possibilities of the class shrink a little bit. I think another development is Georgia's really, in my mind's eye, operating with 24 commitments and not 20 and not 25. Of course, that's the 3-star defensive lineman Stephon Shivers, who hasn't made a public decommitment, even though he's made a public reopening of his recruitment that I don't see in the class. So Georgia might have about maybe 4 or 5 names to deal with in the high school ranks. And I still think they're going to go hard for another 4 or 5 guys in the portal.
All right, Jeff, really good stuff. I appreciate that. Look forward to traveling over to Mississippi with you here today. And, of course, we'll talk to you back here next week at the same time. And by then, we really will be getting closer to the early signing period here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to talking to you then.
See you, buddy. Take it easy, man.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I'm really glad Jeff brought up what he did as it relates to the scholarship number. And if you'll remember, the other day, Kirby Smart was on Atlanta radio station here in Atlanta, 92.9 The Game, and he mentioned during that interview that they were having to operate kind of on 2 different boards. You had the board of what Georgia would be pursuing from a recruiting standpoint if there were going to be 105 scholarships allowed, and the what they were going to operate with if it was going to be an 85 scholarship number. And I think there had been enough chatter amongst the high school community that the expectation was, at one point in time, Kirby had sort of acted like they may not go after 105 scholarship players, but I think there was some chatter within the state that, well, so-and-so was maybe going to get a Georgia offer, and that Georgia really was looking to maybe take full advantage of the expanded number if they had their chance of doing that. But as Dellinger reported, the SEC has decided, I think this is coming out of just a lack of clarity other places, to sort of cap it at 85 for next year. Most teams are probably pretty happy with the 85, number as it is. Perhaps Georgia would have been a bit more aggressive in its roster expansion, but those rosters right now, according to an SEC, I guess, policy put in place that Dellinger reported, and Dellinger is typically pretty good on this type of thing, staying at 85. That means the Georgia signing class, from a numbers standpoint, is going to end up looking pretty similar to what it always has been. So good reporting from Ross Dellinger, and I'm glad that Jeff mentioned it because it probably needed to be mentioned in today's show. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, Jeff and I sit here and do a recruiting conversation on Friday. And if you want to have kind of your own sort of casual version of that with Jeff Sentell, then you need to be on our DawgNation cruise coming up this April. What a great time to be on board Utopia of the Seas. And Royal Caribbean's been so exciting, I think, over the course of the last couple of years because they've rolled out so many new things. The debut of a brand new ship like Icon of the Seas last January. The debut of Utopia of the Seas in July. That's still the newest of these Royal Caribbean cruise ships. There are more on the way. Utopia is the newest. And so, behind the scenes here, I'd worked really hard to get this new, great-looking Oasis class of ships, probably the final of the Oasis class of ships, Utopia of the Seas. I wanted that for our DawgNation cruise, and we've got it. And I want you to be a part of it with us. It's April of 2025. It's a great getaway. It's 4 nights, right? It's a 4-night cruise. You leave out on a Monday. You get back on a Friday. So it's pretty convenient. I would say that for my family right now, the kind of 3-night, 4-night cruises, those probably work for us about as well as anything, just because we've got so much going on. Everybody does. And so these shorter cruises oftentimes are a really convenient option. I think Royal Caribbean's doing a great job in the shorter cruise space. So let Jessica Slater help plan one for you, including our DawgNation cruise in April. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, for more on that today. Okay, let's do a couple of stories here. Obviously, LSU, Alabama, prime time tomorrow night. Going to be a lot of fun. And what has made it more fun is the fact there's going to be a live tiger now on the sideline for LSU here. This has been somewhat controversial in Louisiana. Of course, Louisiana and controversy always go hand in hand. Politics have gotten involved. Politics are involved in everything when it comes to Louisiana. So what the deal here is that LSU has a live tiger mascot. His name is Mike. It's like Mike the 7th or something like that. Kind of like we have our Uggas over here, Georgia. And it used to be that he would be on the sideline for games, has not been doing that in recent years. He's just sort of in his little enclosure, kind of on campus, but not in the stadium. Well, I guess is it the governor of Louisiana? I only halfway know all the details of this. The governor of Louisiana wanted a tiger on the sideline for the game. And the LSU animal handlers did not want to put Mike on the sideline, so they've gone out and found a different tiger. They're going to bring him there. They're going to put him on the sideline during the game, right there next to where Alabama runs out. This sort of old school classic LSU. This is also one of those deals where this is, to me, a very SEC story because within the SEC football community, you oftentimes have like two factions. Like one faction sort of hears this story, we're like, man, this is so much fun. I can't wait to make the environment as cool as possible. And obviously, who wouldn't think a live tiger in the sidelines is cool? There's also sort of like the, I guess, more academic-minded of the LSU people who are like, well, if our animal trainers don't, or not trainers, whatever you call it, animal, zoologists, whatever, I don't even know. If they don't want to put the tiger on the sideline, then maybe we shouldn't be doing this. There's a pretty big divide here, and that is, is this just stock footage or is this actual Mike here? Okay, yeah. So this is actually Mike here, and he's going to leap towards the camera, which is quite an effect. So this is actually Mike from his enclosure there outside the stadium. I guess that's where his handlers or whatever you call like the people that sort of manage the animals. This is courtesy of Mike's Twitter account. He does have his own X platform account. So they want to keep him there. The governor wants the tiger, and so now they're going to do that. I think this is really fun. This, to me, is SEC football at its best, and obviously it creates a pretty intense atmosphere there for Saturday. As far as the game itself goes, I like Alabama to win. I do. And I like them to go in there and cover the spread, in fact, against LSU. The fact of the matter is I like Garrett Nussmeier a lot as a quarterback, but the truth is when you bring the rushing element into it, Jalen Milroe is actually having a better year right now than Garrett Nussmeier is. What was it, 25 combined touchdowns, I think 13 on the ground, 12 through the air for Milroe. That's better than the 20 that Nussmeier has on the season. Milroe's yards per attempt number is better. This is also a quarterback that's been in the college football playoff before. Milroe's got some big game experience. I don't know that I would just sort of broadly speaking think that Milroe is a better quarterback than Nussmeier is, but he's perhaps having a better year, and he's clearly more experienced when it comes to the sort of big games that he's going to be asked to win on Saturday. Alabama's maybe playing for its playoff life on the road here. That's the kind of spot, where Milroe has probably done well in the past. On the flip side here, when you look at the two coaches, in the history of Brian Kelly at LSU, like how many true big wins does he have? probably beating Alabama in 2022. That would count as that. They won the SEC West because of that win that particular season. So that's a big win. But on the other side, a lot less coaching experience for Kalen DeBoer, but he's beaten Oregon 3 times while at Washington, a couple of times a year ago on the way to a Pac-12 conference championship. It's a now defunct league, but that was still the sort of conference title that got him into the playoff, and then he beat Texas in the playoffs and making his way to a national championship game. I think that DeBoer, from a big game standpoint, is probably the more accomplished coach, even though Kelly's been coaching far longer. I would say that Milroe is the more accomplished quarterback between the comparison between he and Garrett Nussmeier. I don't feel great about this. To me, sometimes it kind of comes down to what story do you want to tell yourself if you're wrong about your prediction? And it just sort of seems like it's sort of the safer spot to pick Alabama. And in fact, let me give you a phrase we heard a lot in the election coverage of, like, you're watching the returns coming in. Somebody will say, you'd rather be so-and-so right now as opposed to so-and-so. Most of us are not Alabama fans or LSU fans. But if you had to be on the right side on Saturday, who would you rather be? Would you rather be LSU getting to be at home, or would you rather be Alabama knowing you've got Milroe and a coach who's won some big games before? I think I'd rather be Alabama on Saturday than LSU, and that's why they are my pick. Pretty big reaction yesterday when it was announced that Billy Napier was returning as Florida's coach for 2025. We've said all along that while the boosters and the rank-and-file fans, they clearly want Napier gone, Scott Strickland does not, because Scott Strickland's wise enough to know that if Napier needs to be fired, then Strickland probably needs to be fired too. So Strickland preserves a measure of job security by bringing back Napier for another year. There's also turmoil in the president's office there at Florida. So the institutional preference was always going to bring back Napier. The announcement drops, obviously, when it does, I believe, to get out in front of the losses that are likely still to come for Florida. Their November schedule, even with Florida State not being quite as good anymore, is still really tough. It's Texas this Saturday. They're like a 3-touchdown underdog. You've got LSU still looming. I believe it's Ole Miss still looming in addition to that. There are a lot more losses to come for Florida, for a fan base that's already pretty fickle. So with every mounting loss, the question of, is Napier going to be fired? This is their way of kind of getting out in front of them. There's also some chatter of, giving Napier everything that he needs to win. That's obviously a little bit of a blame game of, you guys need to pony up more money to the fans and boosters. There's some thought of changes with the coaching staff, but it seems like they've kind of already tinkered with some of that. I think some Florida fans are not quite so sure what all these guys are doing anyway. For instance, Austin Armstrong, one-time celebrated defensive coordinator hire. It seems like he's lost his luster. The division of responsibilities amongst the offensive coaching staff, that's causing some issues among Gator fans, and they've done 1,000 different things to sort of fix their special teams. They still had a huge special teams blunder against Georgia this past weekend. So Florida fans are not happy right now, but I would say if you're a Georgia fan, you got to view this as pretty good news. There is no way Billy Napier is building Florida into a big winner. No way. And you can debate, should he be fired or not, that's fine. But if you're watching on video, that guy right there does not strike fear in the heart of Georgia fans. He just doesn't. So as long as he is the head coach at Florida, DJ Lagway being healthy or not, as long as Billy Napier as the head coach at Florida, the Florida Gators aren't going to be very much for Georgia to worry about. And so that is sort of the bottom line on that. A couple other thoughts on some of the other games here this weekend. Let me give you one more from the SEC here for a moment. You never thought you'd be here, but here we are. I think that Vanderbilt hosting South Carolina is a fascinating game. Vandy's been terrific this year in these sort of big game spots, down to the wire against Texas, beating Alabama, going to overtime before losing to Missouri. They've been really tough in games, kind of against ranked opponents and as an underdog. They're covering the spread in all these games. They're winning, many of them outright. What a year that Vanderbilt's having. But quietly, I think that South Carolina's having a really good year too. They're a 3.5-point favorite on the road here. I do like them to cover that number. Look at what they've done on the road here this season. It was playing right down to the wire at Alabama. It's, a blowout win against Oklahoma, a blowout win against Kentucky. South Carolina's been a very good road team. Shane Beamer, just for whatever reason, does not get credit at South Carolina, but Beamer's doing a really good job there in Columbia, doing a very good job here this year. His recruiting efforts are I think, notable, just given the fact that South Carolina competes at a little bit of a disadvantage from a program standpoint. Beamer is upgrading the talent level. Their defense is fantastic, and I think that's enough to win at Vanderbilt. There's a little bit of a question about Diego Pavia's health status here. I can't speak to that one way or another. I like South Carolina in the game, even if Pavia is healthy, so I'll take them there. Outside the SEC, I'm fascinated by Indiana playing its toughest opponent of the weekend against Michigan tomorrow. I'm curious to see what they bring to the table. The truth is, I don't like this Michigan coaching staff. I don't like Sharon Moore. I don't like Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator. I don't like that look from the Wolverines right now. So even with what is a little bit of a step up in weight class for Indiana, I'm assuming the Wolverines don't put up much of a fight. I'll also tell you this to close it out. Isn't it interesting? And I don't quite have a great explanation for this necessarily. A year ago, everybody's talking about Colorado all the time. Hot topic, oversaturated with Colorado talk for a team that wasn't worthy of any of that. But this year, Colorado's actually performing pretty well. They're 6-2. They're alive in the Big 12, title race. They're going on the road on Saturday as a small favorite at Texas Tech, coming off of a Texas Tech upset win over Iowa State last week. Like, if Colorado wins this game on the road, which I don't necessarily think they're going to, but if they do, then Dion and Shador and Travis Hunter, it's time to start talking about them again. Somehow we're not talking about Colorado enough right now after talking about them so much a year ago. Strange how that's working out. But, I would say that Colorado is worth your time here this weekend, finding out, can they go on the road and win? Because they are the only, I believe, Big 12 team that has enough cachet to potentially be in the conversation for a potential at-large spot. We've talked about that before. Would these leagues, ACC, Big 12, find their way to get a second playoff team? If there's any chatter of that at all in the Big 12, Colorado is the only candidate, but of course they've got to keep winning for that to happen. So watch that in Lubbock against Texas Tech on Saturday. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me also, before we get ready to get you fired up for Georgia and Ole Miss on Saturday, give you a couple things here. Our friends at White's Pools. I love what White's Pools does for folks here in our audience and what they've done for the great coach Mark Richt, just completely transforming his backyard. Beautiful pool. They can do the same thing for you. This is their fourth generation of family-owned service in the swimming pool business there. They do custom in-ground pools. They do cleaning service, of course, and all the water testing, all the stuff that you need on all that. They've been internationally recognized as a premier builder. Second place they won in the International Building Design Award, so incredible honor. And I told you, they put the great pool in for Mark Richt. They can do that for you. 2 retail locations, Watkinsville and Loganville. And they'll also offer the free AquaRite salt system on any of those new construction products they're putting together there. So find them online. It's whitespools.com. That's spelled like the color, WHITES, whitespools.com for more on that. Also, our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips have been so good about all of our DawgNation Invasion events here this year. I want to make you aware of some other good stuff they have. You got to be a Falcons fan, for instance. They got a big event coming up in Las Vegas, getting ready for the Falcons trip out there to see the Raiders, which obviously, by the way, includes Brock Bowers, if you're interested in that. If the game is Monday, December 16th, Falcons in Las Vegas against the Raiders. You can do a 3-night stay at the Planet Hollywood Resort and Casino right there on the Vegas Strip. So a really cool thing. And as a part of the event, you've got a welcome party, a Q&A with the terrific former Falcon Jamal Anderson. Matt Chernoff from 680 The Fan's going to be there too. Big pep rally the night before the game, and the tailgate the day of the game, which includes all you can eat, all you can drink, all kinds of fun stuff there for that. So it's December 16th. That's when the game is. If you go to atlsportstrips.com, you can get more information on that. That's atlsportstrips.com for more information on that. Okay, so it's become a Friday staple. It's obviously our long finish here, presented by the Finish Long Drink. And during the season, one of the things we've had a great time doing is looking at the video talents of our own Cody Chaffins, who shoots and edits these videos so exciting and so well to get you fired up and ready for Georgia traveling to Oxford tomorrow. Good stuff from our Cody Chaffins here as part of a long finish presented by the Finish Long Drink.
Here at Georgia, we love the fourth quarter. That's where we have the advantage. The fourth quarter is what we do. And playing in the fourth quarter in all our close games, we enjoy it. Those close games is part of college football. I mean, college football is going into a whole different era now, and we're just adjusting to it, and we love it. loving the competition. What we work for, what we earn. You know, we work all week long, all season long, all off season for the fourth quarter. You know, that's what we do. And once we get there, we have to finish.
How much do you love that? 4 fingers in the air for the Georgia Bulldogs. Last week, big fourth quarter to beat Florida. Final 15 minutes against Ole Miss tomorrow, going to be crucial too. And then think about next Saturday, back home. Night game, awesome atmosphere against Tennessee. You get chills thinking about what that's all going to be, too. Krypton theme, 4 fingers in the air. Big day tomorrow for these dogs. And the fourth quarter could be the biggest moments of them all. Great job by Cody Chaffins. That is our long finish presented by the Finish Long Drink. And my encouragement to you is, as you're getting ready to enjoy some Georgia football tomorrow or anything this month of November into the holiday season, make the Finish Long Drink the perfect accompaniment for you on all of that. Whether it's the version that I like, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, that's the traditional citrus, or it's the long drink peach flavored version, the long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar, the long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Whatever your favorite is, the cranberry too, make sure you pick some up and enjoy it. If you're out there playing golf, it obviously goes great with that. Y'all know we love the Finish Long Drink while we're playing some golf. That's, of course, what we're all about. But whatever you're doing, it's going to go great with all of your festivities here this fall, heading towards the holiday season. So find out more online at thelongdrink.com. So yesterday, we had a brief appearance from Eddie the Blind Squirrel in our Golden Shoe. No update from him. You know, he briefly appeared there at Milton High School, and then he's disappeared again. It's almost like, if you're a fan of 90s movies, it's almost like Kaiser Sose. Like, he popped up to kind of participate in the flip of CJ Wiley. We may never see him again. I mean, I really don't know what that is, but obviously we want him to feel safe to come back at any point in time. So as we give you our Golden Shoe for today, we'll do it with the spirit of Free Eddie still very much alive here. In fact, let's show you that Golden Shoe here today. Our buddy Mad Dog here, doing a great job of, you see the Georgia Bulldog on one side, the Ole Miss Rebel on the other. They're getting ready for a big old fight here tomorrow indeed for all of that. Good stuff from Mad Dog on that. We'll give him a Golden Shoe. We'll say Free Eddie indeed here. And I wish you all a happy weekend on that. Lousy, stinking Gators, 1,462 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Eddie loves it. Florida fans hate the fact that Eddie loves it. That's why they're coming after him. But eventually, all is going to be right in that world, and that number is going to keep on climbing. So y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy the game. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. Okay, I got to be quick today, because I got some stuff I got to do before we hit the road. But looking forward to a fun one this weekend. Looking forward to seeing, if you're going to be in Oxford, come say hello to us. We'll be bouncing around there a little bit. It's going to be raining, I think. But obviously, I can't wait to see you as a part of our DawgNation postgame show at the end of the game. And, of course, Kaylee's got you starting at 1:30 for the game day pregame show there, too. And we also got to do a big pick here coming up in a moment. Miami and Georgia Tech, thoughts on that game coming up? We're going to get to that here in just a couple of minutes. Let me take some comments, though, before we do all of that. Mike Tampa Dog says Strickland's hedging his bet. Yeah, perhaps that's the case. I mean, obviously, you don't climb to the top of the college athletics world without having a certain instinct for self-preservation. Strickland would be like anybody else when it comes to that. Let's see what else. Illy Woe on the subject of Jackson Dart through the air. Yeah, you got to be careful of him on Saturday. Foster Moss would like to see Dylan Bell used in the backfield. Yeah, I mean, I think anything you can do to be creative with your running game, as we said before, the Ole Miss defense line really is very good. So the more you can be creative and sort of take the action away from the center of the field, that might be a smart thing to do there on Saturday. Tyler Puglisi says, looking forward to seeing you next week for the Tennessee game. We're going to be down from New Jersey. That's awesome. I can't wait to see you, Tyler. Looking forward to that, too. It should be a big one for UGA. Christy asked me where I got this shirt. This is one of those expensive ones. This is like Peter Millar, I guess. I did have the logo for it. I asked them to put like the football helmet logo. It's kind of the old school coach's shirt like you used to see back in the 80s. I did have them do that. I don't wear it on the show a lot because white has a tendency to sort of wash me out. But thank you. But this is a Peter Millar. They're obviously not super cheap, but they are pretty good, I guess. Foster Moss, thank you. Cool. Christy asked about Cutter and Buck. This one's not. This is Peter Millar, but I do like the Cutter and Buck stuff. I think that's really good. And I like the Cutter and Buck. This is not an ad, although they do sell at the UGA bookstore. It's a little bit less expensive than some of the other Georgia stuff, but I think the Cutter and Buck stuff is almost just as nice. I do. Dogs Rolling Loud said that Eddie's out there getting those flips. Yeah, it's kind of the thing that I think some of Eddie's secrecy right now is not just the perhaps fear he faces for his own life, but also his desire to, make moves behind the scenes for Georgia without people kind of knowing what he's doing. Bill Shirley wants to see more motion from Georgia. Yeah, I mean, I think anything you can do pre-snap, especially against, I guess, like I said before, a big, powerful, successful defensive front for Ole Miss, I think that kind of stuff's always pretty good. And that was always a hallmark of the kind of Todd Monken era. I do believe that, Georgia's tried to maintain, some of that pre-snap. Let me get a few Facebook comments. If we can get this to work here. On Facebook, Kent Holcomb says, I hope everybody's healed up because the junkyard dog defense that played against Texas needs to show up on Saturday. I like that, Ken. I like that for sure. Like that indeed. Susan Levy says, while Lane Kiffin's a great offensive mind, I think that Kirby Smart's an even better defensive mind. And Kirby Smart seems to understand Lane Kiffin's psyche and gets in his head, go Dogs. I would agree with that. I think that, pretty quietly, even without it being perfect, they've had their issues against outside run, for instance, had some running game issues against Florida last week. This Georgia defense is still settling in to be one of the very best in the country. And I do think that the best of Georgia somehow kind of comes with Georgia putting a pretty big stamp on this game from a defensive standpoint. That's the reason really why I like Georgia to win, is because I do like the defense to sort of step up and own the day. Miriam Corbin is going to be in Oxford. Miriam, I'll look forward to hopefully getting a chance to see you. That's great. Philip, Jordan Wells' birthday. Happy birthday, Philip. That's awesome, man. I appreciate that. Philip has been with us almost as long as anybody is in the comment section. So happy birthday to him indeed, for sure. Brian Lindsay predicts Dalen Everett to have a big game. I like that. But happy birthday to PJW indeed. It's kind of funny. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole yesterday where I ended up looking at some old videos, things like that. Really weird thing how long we've been doing all this now. For sure. G. Gray says he, of course, speaking from the perspective of a Bama fan, says I get the ball to ETN and Nate at least 30 times. We'll see how much Georgia can make those guys a factor tomorrow, and obviously how healthy ETN perhaps is. Let's see what else. UJ Marine says that White is clean. He says you can't open the door without getting something on it. Yeah, if we zoomed in here, which you can't really do, like there's a spot that's kind of like, it's like sort of off color now, and it's kind of lost its kind of like sheen. Kind of like the expensive stuff like this has a little bit of I don't know if sheen is the right word. But there's like a texture to it that makes you know that it costs a lot of money. This one kind of has a spot missing from that because I do just get stuff. I'm the grossest eater. I just get stuff everywhere. I can't eat anything without getting it all over me. I don't know why that is. SEM Dog says that his new theory is that Eddie may actually be behind the scenes working with the Florida administration, convincing them to keep Billy Napier. I wouldn't put anything past Eddie right now. I really wouldn't. would not put anything past him. All right, yeah, we got to get ready to go. I've got to do a couple things before we leave today, so I want to make sure I stay on time for that. But on Fridays, one of the things that we love is the chance to check in. You know, we call this the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Our buddy Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews, big part of that. And on Fridays, starting at noon on the DawgNation video channels, we have a show called Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, where the entire DawgNation team, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sentell, Connor Riley, Keely Manziel, and me, at least a lot of our DawgNation team, will make our picks for the biggest games of the upcoming weekend. And then Dari Payro decides, does he want to go with the flow and join us on whatever our consensus happens to be? Official picks, Georgia Ole Miss, Alabama LSU, all of that starts today live at noon and then on demand anytime after that. But if you've never seen the show or you kind of want a little more of the show, how about an official pick for Miami hosting, I should say traveling to Georgia Tech, our best bets kind of beyond. I had a great sort of deep cut last week. Rice outright win over Navy. We called that here. We took Rice plus the points in that spot. So you obviously want to stick around for all of that. Thanks for making this a great week for us. Thank you to R.S. Andrews, who makes the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. And if you're in anticipation of the holiday season, you want to get your heating system tuned up, if you want to get your plumbing issues fixed because you got family coming over, R.S. Andrews can take care of all of that for you. So find them online at rsandrews.com. I'm going to say goodbye to you. We'll throw it to our Miami Georgia Tech pick and our best bets, and then we'll see you at noon today for Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Then tomorrow, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time for our game day pregame show. Kaylee Manziel's got you on that. And I'll see you on the field from Vaught Hemingway Stadium tomorrow evening, hopefully talking about a Georgia win against Ole Miss. Have a great weekend, everybody. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then. Hello, DawgNation Daily viewers. Welcome into our sort of version of the R.S. Andrews Cool Down, where we give you a taste of Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, our official picks for some of the biggest games in the upcoming weekend from a point spread perspective. Total confession, this week, not quite as deep a slate of big games, although if you do check out Go With The Flow, you'll see thoughts on Georgia and Ole Miss. That's a lot of fun. LSU and Alabama, that is, of course, a lot of fun. And Indiana perhaps getting its first chance to prove it's truly worthy of a top 10 ranking as it hosts Michigan. So we'll give you thoughts on that. The other game we want to give you some picks on here right now, it's the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets hosting the Miami Hurricanes. Obviously, Miami riding high, ranked 4th by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee on Tuesday night, fresh off kind of a blowout win against Duke. Didn't start off that way, but eventually the Hurricanes were able to build some margin. And for Georgia Tech, that began the year with so much promise, falling on hard times as of late, losers of a couple of straight here. Knocked off by Virginia Tech, Notre Dame before that. Maybe a little magic at home as an underdog here, getting 11.5 points from the Miami Hurricanes. So, Mike, we'll come back to you. Miami sights in the college football playoff, but a tricky road game in Atlanta stands in the way for this upcoming weekend. What do you want to do with Miami as an 11.5 point favorite of the Yellow Jackets?
Well, you know, Georgia Tech won this game last year at Miami, and that's why I'm going to take Miami, because they're going to come in loaded for bear. And even though it's a noon kickoff, I think Cam Ward and the Hurricanes are going to be too strong for the Yellow Jackets. So give me Miami and lay the points.
So Mike takes the favorite there in that spot. Jeff Sentell, what about for you?
Supposedly Haynes King is supposed to come back this week for the Jackets, tentatively. I can tell you this, folks. King James, King Arthur and his merry men, all knights of the round table, could come back. There's still no way the Yellow Jackets are going to deal with that 11.5. Lay the points, give me the Hurricanes.
Yeah, I would say the point spread suggests that Haynes King is likely to play based on that spread. Connor, a little bit of love from Miami here right now. What do you think?
I can't believe we're actually picking an ACC game here. I mean, Mr. SEC Brandon with another SEC game on the board that we could have picked. He elects not to go there.
Hold on. Which game? Hold on. No, I got to hear this. Which game would you have picked?
Oklahoma, Missouri. It's a BA classic.
Yeah.
Oklahoma, a favorite against a ranked Missouri team. I mean, that's a BA special. He's trying to stack his wins there. I guess he's trying to make it a little bit more fair for the rest of us here.
I did have that one potentially circled as the best bet. I'm not taking it, but I definitely had my eyes on the Sooners in that spot. That's good of you to notice that. I appreciate that.
I'm actually going to take Georgia Tech here. I like Haynes King. Again, if Haynes King plays in this game and he finishes this game, I feel great. I was on the right side all last week against Miami with Duke and my best bet, and then Manny Diaz went complete coward in that game and sort of spun away from it there. I'm not overly impressed with this Miami defense. I think Georgia Tech's going to be able to run the ball, control the clock, keep Cam Ward off the field, and keep this within 10 points. And so give me Georgia Tech here.
A lot of these top 10 teams really haven't picked very much. I don't think we've picked Miami since week one. I'm going to try to find a way to get these teams in the show here a little bit. Kaylee, what do you think here? Miami giving 11.5 to the Yellow Jackets.
I'm going to take Georgia Tech. The last 4 games, which they've been an underdog, they've covered the spread. It has all the makings of a close game. Noon kickoff at Georgia Tech. We've seen Miami play some close games, so I'm going to take the Jackets.
Yeah, I kind of like Georgia Tech here, too. Not by a wide margin or anything like that. Just a little bit of skepticism from Miami for some of the reasons that Connor mentioned. Perhaps a little bit of a heat check here in this particular spot. I believe that also puts the flow on the side of Georgia Tech here, too. Dar, you want to go with the flow and take Georgia Tech, getting 11.5 right now?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down, like everyone said, Haynes King. If he plays, I like Georgia Tech to get a cover in this game. I like the flow that they'll be able to do in the game with him behind center. If he doesn't play, then, I mean, Miami, shoved the house on it. They're going to rout Georgia Tech by probably 20 points.
Okay, interesting. Worth watching there, the early kick in the ACC with Tech hosting Miami. Now, we'll broaden things out. The entire board at your disposal. Mike, I've heard from you several times, but all the easy games, somehow I wasn't putting those out there. So I expect you now to give me a whole menu of all these supposedly easy games that I've avoided picking here today. Just overwhelm us with a whole list of winners here, please, by all means.
Well, Brandon, one game you didn't select because you didn't want to pick the lousy stinking Gators was Florida getting 21.5 at Texas, which you know is easy money. Florida's going to cover that spread. Another game that you didn't want to pick in the SEC is Tennessee playing host to Mississippi State, given 23.5 when I'm not even sure Tennessee is going to score that many. So I'm going to take Mississippi State in the points in that. I'm not going to touch Oklahoma, Missouri. I think it's a good game that would have been worthy of our picks panel, but I'll leave that for Connor or Kaylee.
Yeah, we don't really typically pick 20-plus point spreads. High variance games, not always the most compelling, but certainly Mike there on the side of both underdogs, if I heard correct, with Florida and Mississippi State there in the SEC. Jeff Sentell, how about for you? Any best bets of the weekend?
Yeah, I think like many have said, this slate of games needs to be sponsored by a waste management company. I'd like to see Georgia-centric picks in my best bets whenever I can. I've found the Georgia Ole Miss over-under at 54.5. I like the under there, folks, with my best bet for the week.
Connor Raleigh, how about for you?
Yeah, I've got 2 games here. I actually am going to take Oklahoma here because this team can't block worth anything, and they're still favored. I worry about this Missouri team, what the status is going to be with Brady Cook. So give me Oklahoma here. I've got it at -2.5 on some of the books, so I'm going to gladly snatch up that number while it's primed for that. And then I've got BYU -4. On the road at Utah, sure, it can be a tricky spot. Yes, it's a rivalry game. Both these teams were coming off by one of the great rivalry nicknames out there, the Holy War. Yeah. Utah has lost 4 straight coming into this game. I think it's going to get run up to 5. I like BYU in this spot. I like this BYU team. Give me the Cougars and the points.
Connor, do I have this right? Utah is now the bottom of the standings in the Big 12, I believe.
They've lost 4 straight, and their one win in conference came against Oklahoma State, who was not exactly all that great either.
Yeah, an amazing, obviously reversal of where we thought the year would begin. And I do like your pick of Oklahoma. I think that's – I don't have the guts to take it because I just don't know that I trust the Sooners team here right now. But I do really like that pick. I think that you're on to something with it. I wish I had the guts to pull the trigger on it. Kaylee Manziel, how about for you? Best bets for the weekend?
I think Connor and I might be sharing like the one singular brain cell that we have left because I'm also going to take BYU over Utah.
All right, so there you go on that. I've got 2 picks for you this weekend. Now, in fairness, I only went 1-1 with my picks last week, missed the over-under on the Oregon-Michigan, which disappoints me because I've been riding those Oregon unders for a little while, and that did not obviously cash on Saturday, but I did give you as an outright winner. I took them plus the points, but they won outright. Rice over Navy. 2 picks here this weekend, 1 favorite, 1 underdog. UAB, fresh off probably their best performance of the year, now has to go to Storrs, Connecticut. Huskies have been really good at home for most of the Jim Moore Jr. era. I'm going to take UConn -6.5 against a UAB team that probably would be a bigger dog than this. if not for a recent reversal of fortune there. I do like the underdog, though, in Murfreesboro, as Middle Tennessee State gets 10.5 from a Liberty team that's reeling from 2 straight losses. And look, for a team that probably began the year with some playoff aspirations because they play in the very weak Conference USA, hard for me to say, given that scenario, you almost wonder what the quit factor is there for Jamie Chadwell's team right now. Middle Tennessee State, not a bad team to be given 10.5 to here. So I like the Blue Raiders plus 10.5. I like the Huskies minus 6.5. UConn and Middle Tennessee State, my best bets here for the weekend. We'll see if we can stay hot when it comes to some of those dogs here. Dari, how about for you? Any best bets here for the weekend?
Yeah, I like Iowa against UCLA. I like Iowa minus 6.5. And I like the Virginia-Pittsburgh game. I like Pittsburgh to rebound after getting mopped up by SMU last week to cover the 7.5 points at home.
So let me just say this, Dari. I also like Iowa. We haven't loved teams traveling here this year. I don't think that's a problem for Iowa. And one of the major sports books also has it at 5.5. Would you rather have Iowa at 5.5? I think you probably would, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's great.
I think that you're onto something there. I like your pick of Iowa. I like Connor's pick of Oklahoma. See, that's why I love the best bet section because I think that's good stuff there. So best of luck to everybody with your picks. Check out the Friday edition of Go with the Flow. A lot of fun on that. And, of course, with that, we'll get you back to the R.S. Andrews Cool Down.